This week, Marty Robbins knew the importance of cool, clear water. Farmers know it too. It's dry out there, folks. Will an early planting season allow better application of cover crops this fall? The high price of used farm machinery. And a toy auction brings up the subject of the Farmall 450. This is the Rural Reflections Podcast. Welcome to the Rural Reflections Podcast. You've got Dave Nelson out in Carrington, North Dakota, and Grant Nelson at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio. Dave, you're west side, I'm east side. How are things going out on the west side as far as out in the field?
No, not much been done lately. We've had a little bit of snow and we had a little bit of rain. So I guess we accumulated about 4,200 of moisture, which is the largest amount since probably July 3rd of last year. So I think we are making a little bit of headway in the moisture department anyway.
We had 9/10, or a little bit better than 9/10 early on last week. So that felt pretty good around here, although really, we could probably take 9/10 of an inch every other day for a week. And we'd probably be able to still go in the fields, 3 days after. It's amazingly dry out there.
I think so too. That's same here.
The one thing I noticed earlier on was the blowing dirt, and that always makes me think a little bit about cover crops in the fall, and the fact that it's an early season so far. I think about, there probably be a little bit more room at the end of the season for putting in cover crops. So I just wanted to give a pitch for the NRCS, USDA, or your Soil and Water Conservation District, depending upon how it's set up in your county. Give them a call and get a little bit of information on cover crops. It might be an okay thing. Now, Dave, it seems like every day on my Twitter feed, I get an update about machinery prices. I'll just say it. I get one from Machinery Pete probably every other day. And it seems like we have some awfully high used machinery prices out there. How is it out in Carrington? Is it that way out there?
Yeah, it's surprising. They're talking about how strong the auction sales are because there's a couple of reasons. Machinery dealers are, being held up a little bit on their new stuff. And there's some allocating going on in that. And so there won't be real abundance of new available probably. And then the auctions provide them a way to get a hold of a good piece of machinery. And so they've been strong, real strong.
I noticed even some of the machinery lots around here, not many pieces of machinery really left out there. This is the time of the year probably when people are going to pick up machinery anyway and getting ready for getting out in the field. But at the same time, usually you have a little bit more on the lot. And I was driving by one of the machinery places the other day and I thought to myself, well, at least they've got a chance for the parking lot to dry out a little bit. They've got direct sunshine and some wind. Although I noticed the smaller tractors, they haven't been moving as much. Now, that's maybe just in comparison because the larger stuff is going so fast right now. But usually it seems like that little stuff, especially when you're near, an urban center, you see a lot of those smaller tractors going out a little bit more for people who used to farm and maybe have a small farm out in the country or something along those lines. But those are the tractors I'm seeing. The small implements are sticking around, and it seems like the larger stuff, that's getting sent out awfully quick.
Yes, the large tractors, 450 to 650 or 620 horse, are where everybody's looking. The little tractors, the utility things and stuff, hopefully they'll go when we get towards haying time and so on. But you're right, that's what's left on the lot is something that's really, really ugly or a smaller tractor.
Okay. I got to ask, I think later on in the podcast, we'll talk about electronics a little bit more in depth, but has there been any problem with getting those electronics so far this year?
There is becoming a problem with it because the pipeline is being emptied out. So yeah, there is some issues there. Guidance products and so on are becoming harder to get, and we're definitely being held up by some of the lack of electronics parts.
You know what we're going to need, Dave, if we don't get the electronics parts, is we're going to need a couple trees at the end of the field or maybe a bunch of little fence posts. And then we can just line those up with the crown of the hood on the tractor and just follow that right down the field. And you get pretty straight rows. Not as good as you would with GPS or particularly RTK, but it wouldn't be too bad.
No, I think it would be, that most everybody can drive without that. But the problem with electronics is it's become such an integral part of the machine that even some of the things that you have to have in order to drive the machine are in shorter supply. So,
okay. I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break. We're going to do it a little bit early because I think our second half of our podcast is going to run a bit long. Let's take a break. This is the Rural Reflections Podcast. Welcome back to the Rural Reflections Podcast. Dave, we were talking about electronics when we took a break, and particularly electronics within the agricultural sector. I was watching a program just the other morning, and they said in the next few years, approximately half of the cost of motor vehicles are going to be tied up within electronics. And I thought that was kind of the tail wagging the dog because, what do we use a car for? We use it to move from one place to the other, or a pickup to move from one place to the other. And it seems like electronics shouldn't be the most expensive part of the car or the pickup. With machinery, we're starting to see something along those lines too, where we're starting to get more electronics involved in the tractor or even the whole system as it works with whatever implement it's pulling or combines. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on as far as what are electronics being used for in relation to, the tractor working together with the implement?
Well, it's actually a lot more than a person realizes. You can talk about a computer on a tractor. There are many of them. It's just like a car and like a lot of other equipment. There's one actually for the seat. There's one for the heating and cooling. There's one for transmission control. There's one for the hydraulics control. There's one for lighting. I believe there's probably 10 or 12 computer controllers on the average new tractor now. And they're little modules. There's one under the armrest of the tractor and so on. And each one of them provides a function, whether it operates the hydraulics or whether it operates the ride of the tractor. Just depends on what machine you have and how well equipped it is. But you can't hardly do it without anything. There's no connection between the shift lever and the transmission except by electronics. There's no connection to the engine by the throttle except by electronics. So it's in there. There's no moving away from it unless you go back to a tractor from a long time ago where they were mechanically, everything was operated.
I got to ask you, when was that? I mean, a lot of these transitions happen kind of quietly and a little bit at a time. If we were going to go back to a time when it was all push rods or hydraulics controlling the movement of the vehicle or the operation of the implements, how far back would we have to go?
I would say about 1983, something like that, when the electronics started getting into the way the three-point hitch was operated, and then eventually transmissions. And that was probably the only two things that was much of anything for a while. And then after the first part of the 2000s, our tractors went away from mechanical shifting to completely electronic shifting. And it just became more and more and more since then. Everything is controlled with it now.
I've got a 1982 684 International. I know you've seen it before, and we've talked about it every once in a while. And I want to know, when I bought it, I really like the tractor. I mean, I love that little tractor. but it had, for lack of a better phrase, it had idiot lights on the implement panel. I remember thinking to myself, this might have foretold something to come, you know?
Yeah. Well, it did, you know. I mean, it gradually moves. It goes one step at a time. And the eventual outcome, as far as tractors and so on, is autonomous machinery.
Yeah.
So everything we add is a little piece of the puzzle to getting to the point where the tractor just drives itself.
Well, I noticed Polaris is now using their GEM cars for autonomous use. They're experimenting with autonomous use, but actually more than that, I mean, they've been using them on small scale. So, I mean, it's bleeding into a lot of different areas right now. It's amazing. Even the state of Minnesota is doing some work with autonomous technology right now. And they're one day heading towards autonomous snowplows. So it's baked into the mix right now. I think it's there right now. And of course, with the COVID-19 and all that causing so many problems in supply chain, we're just seeing an Achilles heel maybe of it or something like that. But you know what? Let's lighten things up. Let's talk about auctions. I went to a good one the other day. Well, I didn't really go to one. I went to a virtual one, and it was involving mostly small toy tractors and that sort of thing. And I saw a ride-on combine, a pedal combine, go for $800. And I happened to be there when the new owner came to pick it up. And he was talking about it. He said that on some of these toy tractors and toy combines from the Erdl company, they're actually signed by the owner of the company. And that combine went out for $800, a little ride-on combine. It was amazing, Dave.
And not a bit of electronics on it.
That's exactly right. Not even any mechanical horsepower. It's all leg power for that one, and they're paying pretty good dollar for it. Maybe that they wanted a hedge on all those electronic toys. They wanted to have some good old push power.
Well, some people collect that stuff just for the sake of having it, and others collect, you know, for sentimental value or whatever. But I know sometimes you get started into that stuff, and you just can't quit.
Yep.
You know, so a lot of people, they get one, then they have to have another and another and another. It's just like any collector, and pretty soon they find out they have a whole fleet of little pedal vehicles and so on. I would love to get a 450 International pedal tractor, but they've gone to so far beyond $1,000 now to get one that you can't hardly find one anymore.
Well, I didn't get the pedal version, but during this auction, I got the 450, the W450, the 1/16 scale, and that sure is pretty. I've always liked that tractor. There's a 450 along the highway here in town. It's got a tarp over it, and honestly, I almost run into the curb every time I drive by because I have to just take a quick look at it, you know, just give it one of them sideways looks just to take a look and get a little bit of it in my mind. And I thought, well, let's just buy a toy tractor. Let's see if we can get this. And I got a 450, and I tell you what a pretty tractor. Now, I don't have any experience with the 450. I mean, it's a standard tractor. Can you tell me a little bit about the actual tractor itself?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, there were tractors really became modernized and styled nicely. Mm-hmm. You know, the M's and that, sure, they led up to that. They were not a bad-looking tractor by any means, but they redid the hoods, they redid the hydraulic systems, they went full. PTO was live. Power steering, all of that at one time jumped onto that tractor, and it's where real true styling and good looks started, as far as I'm concerned, into the International line. They just were a super dependable, good power tractor with a lot of modern features. They came with power adjustable wheels on them. They came with TA, so you could shift on the go up and down. Option for 3 hydraulics, 2-point hitch, and then they went backwards a little bit. You could still have a belt pulley on them. So they really had a lot of options that were available for that tractor, right down to a mounted electronic generator that you could run the electric power to your home or your farm with, and they had options for a lot of other things on them. Just amazing number of options as far as mounted equipment that you could put on besides. So they were I would say they were at the height of technology for that time.
And pretty easy on the eye too. You know, when you said that part about the generator, that was mounted in the place where the pulley would have normally been mounted, wasn't it?
Well, yes, it kind of hung off to that side, yes.
I remember those. Well, I'll tell you what, a lot of good history behind them. Heck of a tractor, and like I said, awful easy on the eye. That's that 450. And I've got it up on my shelf, and Dave, every night before I go to bed, I stand and look at my little tractors, and I'm so happy. I even went up there and I put up a little light strip so it does some dramatic lighting from underneath. And I know you've got some small tractors too, and there's just something about it that gives you an opportunity to travel back in time and just remember some of those good, simple times before we had all the electronics. Now, I think the electronics are pretty good, too. Every time I start a vehicle and it has electronic ignition or something like that, I'm awful happy I have that. So there's good and bad with everything in there.
Yeah, there is. And I wouldn't have a vehicle without electronic fuel injection or that. I mean, they're just super. They start good in the winter. They run beautiful, So
yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, it is. Dave, better let you go. I know you're busy today. You got anything else for us before I let you go?
I guess not. Just everybody have a good week.
All right, that sounds good. I hope you get a little rain out there, too, and I hope we do, too. That's my brother Dave out in Carrington, North Dakota. I'm Grant Nelson here at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio, and this is the Rural Reflections Podcast.